You cannot have a situation where only 57 out of competition tests have been put onto fighters over 2 years.
It just seems to be that people know what it is but don't really want to do anything.
If doping becomes so prevalent that the sport can't control itself, the focus on boxing is going to get even worse until eventually someone pulls the plug on this sport. Welcome to Talk Boxing, the Q&A, and the emphasis is on Q, because we're going to discuss one subject today, which is the prevalence of doping in sport and how big of a problem it is in boxing. Spence, this is a subject that keeps on reverberating, keeps on popping up, and is becoming more and more of a concern, albeit it should always be a concern. It doesn't need to be highlighted as much as it is being right now for it not to be a concern. Doping in boxing. We've seen, in recent weeks, we've seen 3 profiled fighters be caught under the allegation of failed drugs tests. We've seen Dillian Whyte, and the circumstance. We've then seen his replacement, Robert Helenius, and we've seen the undisputed super lightweight, Alicia Baumgarten, fail tests post her championship defense in America. How prevalent, in your view, is the challenges of doping in boxing?
I think that I would say over half, high, definitely higher than 50%, maybe 60 to 70%. So maybe 7 out of 10 of them at elite level, maybe at it, and it's getting highlighted so much because there's more testing. I spoke to a testing officer at the fight weekend. Sorry?
Was it a UCAD testing officer?
Yeah, no, it was a VADA testing officer. So she told me the process about it. She was talking about Gareth A. Davis being way out of what he's talking about. Blood passports was nonsense, not something that she thought you could even get close to doing. She said, with Gareth saying about you can get the testing back in an hour, she said it was absolute nonsense. She said the process is we do the random testing. So this is what one of the points I asked her. She said we do the random testing, so we could knock on the door of any of you within, like at any given time. She said, so when we do a test that takes 10 to 12 days to come back. She said, but sometimes when we're doing a test and people say, well, what's the point in doing a test 3 days before the fight and then finding out a week after that they failed the test? She said, because it's a random program that we have to do, but we can't get the tests back from the lab for 10 to 12 days. She said, that is the reality of where we're at. She said, and this is the history of it. The only reason that people are getting caught more now is because VADA's part of the WBC cleanup program. And if fighters don't sign up to the WBC cleanup program, they get taken out of the rankings. Conor Benn refused to sign up to that program until he obviously wanted to get back into rankings and sign back up with it. And I think that's the same with Dillian Whyte and all of them. They need to be in the WBC rankings.
But are we really?
Because what I'm going to say, Simon, is what every fighter does. So we saw it with Conor, saw it with Alicia. We've seen it with Robert Helenius now. What they do is go like, why would I sign up to the VADA voluntary testing? Yeah. Because of the WBC program.
I know that. I know that. But the reality of the circumstances surrounding testing are that it's cost prohibitive. Gareth is not wrong in some of the thinking that he is advocating for. To build up a body of information in and around a blood passport. And understanding that. He's also not wrong necessarily that the processing time for testing doesn't have to be weeks or 12 days.
She said 12 days, yeah.
But I'm not sure that's right. It certainly isn't an hour, like Gareth may have said in that interview, but it is not. It doesn't need to be weeks.
By the way, I've spoke to Frank Warren about this, because she's obviously going to say defending VADA and their testing and the system of processing. Spoke to Frank Warren about this, who said you can ring labs and you can get results back quicker than that.
Of course you can.
So her saying that she's obviously defending
the
situation.
But the driving force behind the problems with testing is cost. Do you know how much it costs for each time you test a fighter? 20,000 quid. Right, so if you're going to test fighters for championship fights every time, and for both fighters, obviously you're going to want to do that for both fighters. It's going to cost £40,000.
That comes every single person.
It comes from the promoters.
Right.
Now, with that in mind, no promoter is going to take that down the pyramid. Right. You're going to have a case for having the high-end fighters being tested and part of the conditionality of a fight. No one on a small hall fight is going to pay £20,000 to test a small hall fighter, or the purse is worth 8,000 quid,
Totally agree.
or whatever it is. So you've got a problem there from the start. So the basic problem with testing, and if you are right, and I would dread to think that you are, that 7 out of 10 fighters are potentially in that circumstances.
Yeah.
That means.
I know. By the way,
that means the bulk of the sport
but
is Spencer. So careful what you're saying there.
Yeah, but understand what I'm saying here. I said elite level fighters. What I'm saying is when they're getting to that level, I'm not saying that they've done it through their careers. I'm saying at that level, I'm thinking now, this is my train of thought. I'm thinking I'm fighting Simon Jordan. I know he's on it. I'm going to get on it because it's going to give it a level playing field. What I'm saying to
what does an elite level fighter look like? Someone's ranked inside the top 15.
Yeah, no, an elite level fighter is the ones that are getting caught, the champions that are getting caught because of the testing system, and they're getting more regularly tested, etc., etc., etc. I'm just saying when they get to elite level, perhaps that's when that's where the problem lies with the guy knowing that, oh, he's probably doing it. I want to make it a level playing field. What I'm saying is there's a huge concern. Whether that's 60%, whether that's 50%. There's way too much of it going on.
Yeah.
Too much of it going on.
It's too much of it going on, and the reasons why there's too much of it going on because the upside outweighs the downside, right? You've also got the situation where you've got circumstances like Conor's situation, where there is an ability to be able to overcome the governance by finding a way around it. In this instance, perhaps jurisdiction, right? Yeah. But the predominant reason why there is an issue with doping and the inability to be able to revolutionize the industry by taking it out and making it 10% rather than 30, 40, 60, 70% is simply the lack of resource. Because UKAD don't have the resources. The reasons why VADA has more prevalence than UKAD is because VADA is guaranteed to test, right? Whereas UKAD has a certain amount of budget, right? They have a certain amount of resource. The promoters pay a certain amount of money into a pot, which is distributed to UKAD, and UKAD will test, but they will not test as regularly and as frequently and as guaranteed as VADA will do. You ask VADA to test fighters for a fight, they'll test them. With UKAD, because of their funding arrangements, they get £9 million to be able to go across 40 sports in this country. So UKAD is the governing body or the governing environment for doping alongside the British Boxing Board of Control are massively underfunded, and you're never going to bridge that cycle unless you do one of two things. Change the dynamics of how people are tested by changing the financial landscape and making testing cheaper, or turning around to broadcasters, turning around to promoters and fighters and saying there has to be more money made available to be able to square this circle, because the broadcasters have got to be in this mix as well. Because they're going to have jeopardy. If this is becoming as more prevalent as it is now, and we're seeming to see it more frequently, then you're going to have fights that are going to be taken off. I mean, the broadcasters that were involved in putting the Conor Benn Chris Eubank Jr. fight on, which was eventually cancelled, would have damn sight better off been contributing money and knowing that this would have produced a better outcome than potentially not being in the middle of it. So there's a real solution that needs to be concocted between an effective, properly, commercially adroit British Boxing Board of Control that needs to recognise that the current regime of UKAD in this country don't work. You cannot have a situation where only 57 out-of-competition tests have been put onto fighters over 2 years. You can't have it.
So that's why we're getting the numbers that we're getting now, because VADA randomly turns up at your door, knocks on your door and tests, and whether that's 3 days before, like the Alicia Baumgardner thing, and we get it back a month later, and someone says, well, what about in the event of that contest someone dies? Where does that leave us then? But VADA are saying, I said, but surely you can get it back within the 3 days before that.
But the whole ridiculousness of it all. I mean, if you look at it and you distill it down, what is the point, besides catching somebody, of testing somebody post-fight? Surely someone should be qualified and cleared to go into a fight, not punished as a result of a fight. So if somebody goes into a fight that was loaded and ultimately damages somebody, and they test him afterwards and find out it was positive, what benefit was that wisdom besides sanctioning that person? But the person that's been damaged has got no consolation in that. So there needs to be a regime that's introduced that can test quicker, that can test as a matter of course before fights, so that you have to qualify to be in a fight, not be punished after a fight. The cost implications of it have to be brought down, and the funding relationship between UKAD as the governing body has to be massively, massively increased by the broadcasters, by the promoters, and perhaps even some.
Achievable? Do you think that, like, because what you're saying
depends what you want.
Is spot on, Simon.
Depends what you want.
But it just seems to be that people know what it is, but don't really want to do it.
Depends what you want.
Now is the time to do it.
Which is the lesser of two evils for broadcasters to be brought to a table and say, there's a potential that you're going to lose fights, that you're going to be building up a massive fight with massive revenues, and you're going to lose that because a fighter is going to test positive. Right? Or we put more money in the sport from the broadcasters alongside the broadcast deals that they do with the Ben Shaloms of the world, or the Queensberrys of the world, or the Eddie Hearns with the DAZN. And we build up a regime which has far more discipline behind it, so that there is more testing, so that people are being caught earlier, the deterrents are there quicker and faster, and the testing regime isn't something for people prepared to roll the dice on. And then you've got the other side of the argument, which is an argument that you've just advanced in this conversation, which is about the consequences of it. Don Charles came up with a very interesting observation about Derek Chisora has talked about 10-year bans. Okay, that's career ending. Okay, and that if that's what your decision is for drug cheating, then that's what your decision is. Some people would say, given the circumstances around certain substances, being given a 10-year ban becomes, for a legitimate or genuine mistake, is a bit harsh, right? And a 4-year ban is more prevalent. Then their argument would be that that's not much of a deterrent, because if you get it down to 2 years, you'll roll the dice, because if the reward is greater. Then Don Charles's idea, Dubois' trainer, was you take away all the benefits of what they got from winning those fights. So if you profited from a fight,
purses, etc.
Your purse is taken, your assets are taken. And that's how serious that you want to get. But it has to come, unfortunately, and I know that people are going to think this is an agenda of mine, and I like Robert Smith a lot, and I am pleased, not for the reasons that Nigel Benn thinks, or not for the reasons that Eddie Hearn might want us to think, that the British Boxing Board of Control and UK have stepped up and said, not on jurisdiction. You get yourself cleared on the medical stuff that you told us about. Get yourself cleared on that, not on jurisdiction. I'm pleased they've done that. But the ability to be able to commercialise this sport and to turn it into a proper situation where testing is a bona fide part of it, because this is the only sport, Spence, football's getting, and football and rugby and other sports are getting really put amongst the mixer for head injuries, for CTE, for degenerative head diseases. And I know that boxing tests and scans and so on and so forth, but it's the only sport that's currently not being put in focus. If doping becomes so prevalent that the sport can't control itself, the focus on boxing is going to get even worse until eventually someone pulls the plug on this sport.
Absolutely.
So in the greater interests of making sure that the proper regimes are put in place, the British Boxing Board of Control and the grown-up promoters have got to look at it properly now. And this is the reason.
It is achievable, though. That's what I'm saying. You know, like because
the
argument has been
£20,000.
It's not realistic because of the financial side of it.
Well, at £20,000 a test, you're never going to get a small hall fight being tested. But if the deterrent, if none of the top guys are doing it, we know what sport is like. People emulate, people copy other people because they think they can get away with it. Football, young players playing football, watching their Premier League heroes spit on the side of the pitch because they see their heroes doing it. If there's nobody getting caught at the top of the game, the bottom of the game won't have the problem. There you go. And that's why the investment needs to go in at the top. And people will say, well, with small hall fights, but they won't do it then.
No, exactly right. That was my point.
They won't do it then. They won't do it then.
They test the elite fighters, because that's where you're finding all these problems. Because I think when they're getting to that level, they're going, well, I know he's on it, I'm doing it. Doesn't mean they've been doing it since the small hall days. But I think in the process of time, that will clean the sport up. But it also
means the promoters have got to operate properly. And, you know, and there was a reason. There was a reason why I asked Eddie Hearn about drug-free sport. And the reasons why I asked him, have you used them recently? And there must be a reason why Eddie Hearn turned around and said, we haven't used them for 6 months, and we found out they used them 3 weeks earlier. And there has to be this lack of clarity and transparency removed. We cannot have any misdirection. We cannot have tests being done and not being sent across the laboratories for 9 days. We cannot have rumours circulating around about fighters wanting to get out of contracts and positive tests not being put forward as a reason for leverage. There has to be a proper approach to this. And I do think it comes from the money. And who's the money in this situation? The promoters and the broadcasters.
And do we need this under one umbrella? You got UKAD, you got VADA, etc.
But
do you
UKAD
think it's one testing agency?
Well, yes and no, because ultimately it's not about the testing agency that does it. It's about when the results come back and how many tests are being done. Nobody gives a UKAD do it, or WADA does it, or VADA does it. They care that it's done and the results come forward. Now, if UKAD are going to continue to be the governing authority, then they need more money, more resource, more determination. The British Boxing Board of Control need to take this more seriously, and the promoters and the broadcasters need to say, right, this is enough now. This is too big a sport. This is going on too frequently. We need to fund it properly and put a stop to this. And that's where it'll come from. It'll come from the broadcasters and the promoters. And the sense I get from a couple of promoters that I speak to is they have an appetite for it. Good. They have an appetite to put more money in because they put fixed amounts in every year. That money gets divvied up and delegated to a certain amount of tests. You need to be able to have significantly more testing, significantly more intelligence about your testing. You need to be able to use trends and analysis that you can take from other industries and other sporting bodies that are being able to get on top of some of this doping stuff. Brilliant. And then you might see better outcomes.